Brookley Chantille Louks was born on December 12, 1982. At 19, she shared an apartment in Greenwood, Indiana, with her 18-year-old sister, Mista. During her teenage years, Brookley was involved in a long, tumultuous 5-year relationship, which involved heavy drug use and led to legal trouble and her decision to drop out of high school. By the time she was 19, Brookley and her sister were working toward new beginnings. She was in a much better place in her life. She had found sobriety, was finally happy, and was working toward her GED. Unfortunately, her ex-boyfriend was still tied to her because of her father's opioid addiction and his violent associate, Joseph Nowicki. On June 24, 2002, Brookley left a friend's home and visited her father's apartment on Cottonwood Drive around 4 p.m. to retrieve some clothes. However, she discovered the apartment had been broken into and called the police. Investigators finished the burglary report by 5:30 p.m., noting that only a computer was missing. After they left, Brookley was seen loading items into her blue 1990 Chevy Corsica with the help of a young man, 19 to 20 years old, with blonde hair. Unbeknownst to her, the computer wasn't really missing. Her father and his associate, Nowicki, had staged the whole thing for insurance purposes. A witness recalled seeing a man carrying that computer across the apartment's parking lot at 3:30 p.m., just before Brookley arrived. The description of the man seen with the computer tower fit the description of the man seen helping her load items into her car. More on that later. At some point that evening, Brookley called her mom to let her know she would be heading to Martinsville, about 30 minutes away, to stay with her new boyfriend. However, she never arrived and was never seen or heard from again. The new boyfriend was ruled out as a suspect in her disappearance. On June 26, 2 days after Brookley was last seen, she failed to show up for work, and her family filed a missing persons report. On July 1, 2002, authorities received an anonymous tip and found her vehicle abandoned in a parking lot in Waverly, Indiana, near the intersection of Indiana State Road 37 and Highway 144, approximately 10 miles from her apartment. There was no sign of Brookley at the vehicle's location, and the driver's seat was pushed all the way back, indicating that whoever last drove the car was much taller than her. The keys to the car were later found under the steering wheel. After her disappearance, Joe Nowicki was named the primary suspect. Although he didn't match the witness description of the young man seen with Brookley, strong circumstantial and some physical evidence linked him to her case. The man last seen with Brookley was later identified in a photo lineup as David Puckett, a friend of her ex-boyfriend, who also knew Nowicki. Investigators believe Puckett stole the computer tower at the direction of Nowicki, and that's when he was seen in the parking lot at 3:30 p.m. They believe he stayed in the area and waited until the police left to go back to the scene, possibly to get something he had left. It's thought that that's when he encountered Brookley and helped her load her stuff into her car. They also theorized that she might have put 2 and 2 together, and that's what led to her disappearance. Phone records show calls between Nowicki and Puckett. The night Brookley vanished, Nowicki repeatedly called her father and others for a ride near the area where her car was later found, and also contacted her ex-boyfriend and his friends. The person who eventually agreed to give Nowicki a ride that night reported that he said he had been fishing and needed a ride home. When the person arrived to pick him up, he had no fishing gear, and it didn't appear he had been fishing at all. Plus, a neighbor reported seeing Brookley's car at Nowicki's home the night she vanished. Another person recalled Nowicki telling him Brookley had been missing for about an hour and a half, but not to talk to the cops, revealing he had knowledge of her disappearance early on. Nowicki's phone activity also placed him at the car's location and showed frequent calls to Brookley before her disappearance, all of which abruptly stopped afterward. Nowicki was not a good guy and had a well-documented history of violent behavior. In 1965, at age 16, he shot his sister and brother-in-law 11 times. They survived, and he only ended up serving 5 years in prison. In 1973, not long after his release, he shot a man in the head 3 times, and received an 11-year sentence. He escaped in 1979 and was recaptured, remaining in prison until his release in 1984. In 1985, Nowicki was arrested for robbery and sexual assault. In 1996, a co-worker named Jean Derringer went missing after being last seen with Nowicki, who gave conflicting accounts. Evidence of a violent attack was found in Jean's home, and there was an attempt to hide the blood. During the investigation, police searched Nowicki's home and found firearms, despite his status as a convicted violent felon, and explicit images of children. Over the years, numerous individuals had reported being threatened and assaulted by him. His reign of terror came to an end in 2003 when he died in the care of hospice from cancer. Before his death, he told numerous conflicting and suspicious stories regarding his whereabouts and the circumstances of the day Brookley disappeared. One story was that Brookley was still alive at the end of June, and he claimed to have exchanged drugs with her. Investigators believe it was just an attempt to change the timeline of her disappearance. Another concerning statement made to the police at this time was that he believed Brookley had met with an ill fate, but declined to elaborate on exactly what he meant by that or how he came to that conclusion. Brookley's sister, Mista, believes Nowicki was responsible for her sister's death and believes it occurred in his garage. Part of the reason she believes this is because investigators found blood in his workshop and evidence of an attempt to clean it up. When questioned, he claimed he injured himself while working on an upholstery project and used a rag to clean the area. However, DNA testing confirmed the blood belonged to Brookley. There was not enough blood to indicate that she had been killed, though. Some recalled Nowicki telling them that he and Brookley were involved in an illegal prescription pill transaction in late June 2002. He allegedly said that he recognized an individual who accompanied her to their final meeting as an undercover officer. Authorities have not confirmed the information. Then, a search of a large property near Paragon, Indiana, uncovered human bone fragments and organic matter. The remains were found in a spot cited multiple times from tips into Brookley's disappearance. Due to the small size and damage to the remains, the department has been unable to confirm that they belong to Brookley definitively, but they don't believe they belong to anyone else. There was also a piece of a buried plastic tarp found. Unfortunately, the fragments of bones were destroyed during testing. While justice was never served in this case, authorities did say they were planning to convene a grand jury and attempt to charge Nowicki with murder, but he died before they could do so. Brookley Louks went missing on June 24, 2002, and as of October 2025, she remains missing, and this case remains unsolved. Janiah McMichael was born on April 28, 2011, to Jasmine McMichael and Antonio Rogers. At 13 years old, she lived in the 1900 block of Virginia Street, now called Malcolm X Boulevard, in Gary, Indiana. Also living in the home were her mother, Jasmine, Jasmine's girlfriend, Kiera Bates, and several of Janiah's siblings. Around midnight on August 11, 2024, Janiah strangely went missing after she and her mother had an argument. Her mother alleged that Janiah got upset and stormed out and never returned. However, not everyone believes that story. Before that, CPS had allegedly been involved with the home regarding abuse against Janiah. It's alleged that someone had been sexually abusing her, and she was 4 to 5 months pregnant when she disappeared. What might have been her last sighting was when she was seen with an older, bald man wearing a White Sox cap and standing about 6 foot 1 inches. Some say the man was 62-year-old Nathaniel Walker, who was the stepfather of her mother's girlfriend. He had allegedly told his friend Kevin Collins of KC Bodyguard Services that he last saw Janiah at a birthday party on June 29, 2024. Some have said Walker allegedly rented a car that day and strangely drove it to eastern Illinois. There have also been many rumors spread online about different people who could be involved. It got so bad that the city of Gary issued a public warning about the spread of significant misinformation on social media and urged people not to share unverified claims that could harm the investigation. Some of the names being passed around were Nathaniel Walker, Janiah's mother, her mother's living girlfriend Kiara Bates, and also a man named Kevin Deshaun Bailey. The allegations against Walker came during a Facebook live stream from one of Janiah's sisters, who said he had sexually assaulted her and Janiah for an extended period of time. The reason her mother has faced accusations is that she provided a full description of the clothes her daughter was wearing when she vanished, but then told multiple media outlets that she didn't even see her daughter leave their home and that she didn't notice her missing until the next day. Authorities asked about searching electronic devices, but her mother said she didn't own a phone or computer. But Janiah's sister disputed this, saying she did own a cell phone. Many people believe her mother, Jasmine, lied because there's incriminating evidence on the cell phone that she doesn't want anyone to see. She also allegedly made comments that if Janiah was really pregnant, she would kick the baby out of her belly. She also allegedly sent text messages saying she didn't want her children. However, that could all be part of the misinformation the city of Gary was referring to. Unfortunately, the family's history of involvement in organized crime has further complicated the case. In 2015, both Janiah's mother and grandmother were charged with witness intimidation related to a murder case involving her uncle, who was a member of the Latin Kings gang. Volunteer searchers have also faced resistance, including alleged gang activity near abandoned properties close to Janiah's home. Warning shots were fired, making this case even more dangerous to investigate. Plus, the community of Gary is known for its abundance of vacant, dilapidated homes and lots, surrounded by extensive open land. Not only are these dangerous areas, but the houses themselves are dangerous to search. In the spring of 2025, the FBI joined the investigation and helped search Janiah's home, but nothing led to her whereabouts. Janiah is described as 5 feet tall and 110 pounds. There is a reward of up to $30,000 for information that could solve this mystery. Tips can be submitted anonymously to the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI or online at tips.fbi.gov. Janiah went missing on or around August 12, 2024, and as of October 2025, she remains missing, and this case remains unsolved. Nancy Kay Lyons was born on October 22, 1955, the middle child of 8 and raised in Madison, Indiana. She graduated from Southwestern High School in 1974 and was a faithful member of the Wesleyan faith from a young age. She was a professional nanny in the Louisville, Kentucky area for 11 years, and then in the Indianapolis area until the mid-1990s. Nancy never married or had children and was described as a free spirit who loved to sing and dance and staying up late talking, swapping stories with old friends and loved ones. She'd move from place to place, usually to be close to one of her siblings, and would spoil her nieces and nephews for a few years before moving on to a new place. She had a large collection of Boyd's bears, which she deeply cherished. In 1999, she moved from north central Indiana to an apartment in Carthage to be closer to her younger sister Deborah Mitchell and her husband Roland. Once there, she got a job at the Little Wesleyan Church. Unfortunately, she would meet a tragic end 3 years later. On June 17, 2002, Nancy disappeared while heading home from Walmart in Rushville, Indiana. At 9 p.m., a little over an hour after leaving Walmart, her sister Deborah and her brother-in-law Roland saw her car, but didn't believe it was Nancy's because they forgot that she had trim down the side. Apparently, Nancy had pulled over in her red Nissan Sentra after getting a rear flat tire. A receipt was also found inside that showed she checked out at Register 4 at 7:52 p.m. Not long after, at 8:15 p.m., witnesses recalled seeing her car unoccupied but still running. At 11:06 p.m., John and Terry Shelby reported the car abandoned. Terry had driven by it at 8:30 p.m. and said the lights and flashers were on. When John got off work at around 10 p.m., he spotted the car as well and decided to stop. Upon inspection of the car, he found the flat tire and the spare tire still in the half-open trunk, and the driver's side window down with her purse open inside. Unfortunately, authorities never questioned the couple about the car that night or what they had seen. By 11:30 p.m., Nancy's friend, Pam Heiner, had been notified of her disappearance, as well as Linda Bodicker, who was a friend and manager of the Carthage Manor, where Nancy lived. By 12:30 a.m. on June 18th, the Carthage police and her sister and brother-in-law were given access by Linda to Nancy's apartment. At this point, multiple people were trying to find Nancy, including Nick Ernstes and Nancy's niece and Deborah's daughter, Krista Mitchell. They had also gone to Nancy's apartment to look for a cell phone bill because they didn't have Nancy's cell number and wanted to call her. They were unaware that her cell phone was still in her car. While they did this, Deborah and Rollin went back to the scene where her car was found. I know it sounds strange that they didn't know her cell phone number, but in 2002, many people had cell phones for emergencies only, and the numbers weren't widely given out because the cell plans were based on minutes back then and not unlimited like they are now. At this point, many people had been to the scene where her Nissan Sentra was, and then to her apartment. Investigators' reports indicate that nothing in the car suggested a struggle had occurred. Nothing was taken from Nancy's purse or car. Her cell phone, cash, and recently purchased groceries were found inside the vehicle, but as for Nancy, she had vanished into thin air. Police and volunteers scoured the dense woods and nearby fields using cadaver dogs. They urged anyone who might have seen Nancy to come forward, but no one did. Months went by with no clues as to Nancy's whereabouts. Then, in October of 2002, a Bartholomew County farmer discovered Nancy's badly decomposed remains in his soybean field. The remains were found roughly 30 miles from where Nancy's car had been found. Medical experts determined she had been severely beaten, and her ultimate cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. If she was sexually assaulted, it has not been made public, so it's unclear if DNA was recovered. Nancy was murdered on or around June 17, 2002, and as of October 2025, no suspects have ever been named, and this case remains unsolved. Raymond Lee Hunley Jr. was born in Winchester, Indiana on March 11, 1962, to parents Raymond Sr. and Phyllis. He grew up in Portland, Indiana, and was a member of the Army National Guard and went by the nickname Rayleigh. He was also the father of a 6-week-old daughter named Sarah and had just proposed marriage to her mother. Friends and family described him as a fish lover who enjoyed spending much of his time outdoors. He was essentially proud of the car he saved for, which is believed to be a Dodge Charger. Unfortunately, in 1982, he strangely went missing. On December 6, he was last seen playing basketball with his friend Kevin at the local Army National Guard Armory. A janitor at the armory, named Harold, recalled seeing Rayleigh using a payphone there, and both he and Kevin said nothing seemed out of the ordinary with Rayleigh's behavior that day. After his disappearance, his car was found still parked at the armory on West Water Street with the engine still running, and his newly purchased clothes, wallet, lighter, and other personal items were still inside. However, there was no sign of struggle or any indication of what may have happened to him at the scene. It's possible something happened when he was getting ready to leave, because he was seen scraping ice off his car in the parking lot, where it was ultimately found. They also searched his home, but nothing was found that led to his whereabouts. Sadly, his daughter, Sarah, was only a month and a half old when he disappeared, and she didn't even learn about him until she was 22 years old. She also learned that the man who raised her wasn't her biological father. She wanted to learn more about her father, Rayleigh, but his family refused to discuss it or even answer questions. Unfortunately, the local records kept at the Jay County Jail were destroyed after a leak in the roof. It's believed that Rayleigh's files were part of that. Those files also exist within the state files, but Detective Jeff Hopkins of the Portland Police Department was refused access. If you were at the Portland Armory on December 6, 1982, or if you knew Rayleigh through the Indiana National Guard, basketball at the Armory, or local shops where he bought new clothes that week, contact the Indiana State Police at 317-232-8248 or the Portland Police Department at 260-726-7161. Even a small detail could help. Raymond Hunley Jr. went missing on December 6, 1982, and as of October 2025, he remains missing, and this case remains unsolved. Ronli K. Ratliff was born on March 24, 1980, in Martinsville, Indiana, to Robert and Sandra Ratliff. At the age of 24, she lived in an apartment in downtown Mooresville and was a graduate of Mooresville High School. She worked as a secretary at her stepfather's business, Allen's Body Shop, which was located on the same property as her apartment. She also worked part-time at Union Planters Bank in Indianapolis and was described as a bubbly, happy, and sweet individual who was known for giving compliments. Her mother, Sandra, and stepfather, who went by the nefarious nickname Devilman, struggled with addiction, and Ronli was always there trying to help her mother. The body shop, though legitimate, suffered from drug-related decline. Ronli hated drugs, but couldn't seem to get away from them. Thankfully, she had a great relationship with her biological father, Ron Ratliff, who lived nearby. Unlike her mother and stepfather, Ronli didn't like to party and preferred staying home. However, her mother and stepfather's drug use had her at her wit's end. She had even made a comment to a friend that she was considering turning her mom in so that it would force her into some type of rehab or help for her substance abuse. On the night of April 14, 2004, after leaving work at 9:30 p.m., Ronli went to stay at a house that her mother and stepfather owned on East Dayhuff Road in Mooresville, as her landlord was working on her apartment. The house, although vacant and in foreclosure, was a place where Ronli sometimes found peace and quiet. Unfortunately, that night, which would have been her last before returning to her apartment, a horrible tragedy occurred. She spoke with her mother around 9 p.m., and according to her, Ronli had mentioned something about painting supplies. The next morning at 6:21 a.m., a neighbor called 911 to report that Ronli's parents' house was on fire. Once the fire was out, firefighters found her remains next to the couch, where the fire had been limited to. At first, they thought she died in the fire, but an autopsy showed she was murdered before the fire was set. While not many details about the murder have been released, investigators did say it was a violent death. Investigators have followed multiple leads by tracking vehicles seen at the house, analyzing cell phone calls and computer searches, and interviewing witnesses, including one individual who stopped cooperating when questioning grew specific. Unfortunately, the house had a history of drug activity, and multiple individuals had access to it. Whoever set the house on fire used accelerant and other items they found on the property. One person of interest was a man who worked at the body shop and was a friend of the family. He had stated that he pulled into the driveway between the hours of 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. prior to Ronli's death being discovered. Interestingly, a clock that had been knocked over had a time of 3:30 a.m. The first story he gave the police was that he had been traveling from Mooresville and was going to a nearby residence. He stopped at Ronli's residence to use the restroom located beside the detached garage. He stated that when he pulled in, he noticed Ronli's car was at the home. However, he said the residence was dark and nothing unusual was happening at that point. He later changed his story, saying that he pulled in there to separate some drugs that he had recently purchased and that he didn't want to take all of the drugs that he had on his person into the residence that he was going to visit. Over the years, his story has evolved, and he has provided investigators with 3 different accounts of his activity on that evening. He then willingly provided his DNA, and it matched DNA found on items in the home, so he was definitely there. However, this DNA could have been left at a different time, and it's of note that his DNA didn't match particular items found on her body. Since a lot of the people surrounding the case are involved with drugs, their willingness to cooperate has been limited, with some saying they're afraid to talk because of employees at the body shop her stepfather owns. Years have passed since Ronli's murder, and the statute of limitations on many drug offenses has expired. Authorities hope this encourages new information from those involved in the Mooresville drug scene. Anyone with information concerning Ronli Ratliff's murder is asked to call Crime Stoppers at 317-262-8477 or 800-222-TIPS. You may remain anonymous. Ronli was found murdered in April of 2004, and as of October 2025, this case remains unsolved.